London town, I was invited to play and capture some Dawn of War 3 multiplayer gameplay. We were given one game mode and all three armies to play with, so sit tight and I shall unload the knowledge bombs into your eager peepers. At the event, we mostly played 2v2s on the new game mode, the name of which eludes me, but essentially you have to destroy all three objectives to win. It plays very similarly to Dawn of War 1's Skirmish with classic base building, although no turrets per se, and the objectives have to be destroyed in order, starting with a shield generator, followed by a large turret, and finally a power core. The resource points in Dawn of War 3 are very similar to other Dawn of War games. Similar to power generators in Dawn of War 2, all points can be reinforced with outposts. These outposts are armed with a turret in Dawn of War 3, and they let you build generators depending on the type of node. Some nodes are exclusively power, others are just requisition, and some are a mix. There is also a brand new type of resource called elite points. One thing worth noting that I didn't immediately realise is that builder units, servitors, Gretchens and Bonesingers, can decap and cap points. The Bonesingers also have a teleport ability, which makes them particularly useful for spamming early and dominating some early map control. For those not swayed by the new looking objectives, I have been told that classic victory point mode from Dawn of War 2 will be supported on launch. The cover system from Dawn of War 2 is dead and buried, but there are some new additions to the map to help make up for this. Firstly, we have stealth areas, steam vents in the map or abandoned buildings. These areas completely stealth your units within them, useful for keeping vision in certain areas of the map or scouting ahead for the long-range weaponry like the Whirlwind or Fire Prison. There are little areas that give advanced cover. After a short setup time, a bubble appears which protects units from grenades and presumably incoming fire. The best way I found to flush out these was with melee units or a nice big Force Commander hammer smash. Finally, on a 1v1 map I briefly got to play, there was a bridge that allowed easier access to the enemy base. After destroying an object near the bridge, it let the drawbridge fall and gave me a nice access point. I don't know if this can be repaired and my new route cut short, but sadly I didn't have long enough on the map to check. I will personally miss the cover system from Dawn of War 2, but giving the map more of an active role in the ways that I've seen in Dawn of War 3 so far give me a glimmer of hope that all is not lost. Hero units that you may recognise in a fashion from earlier Dawn of War games are called elite units in DAO 3. They are purchased with a special unique resource we mentioned earlier, elite points. These points build over time even if you don't have any elite resource nodes, but grabbing an elite node early will certainly give you an edge throughout the game. These nodes will be hotly contested, as the elites are powerful and can easily turn the tide of battle. Each army has a handful of elites to choose from, but only 3 can be selected into your loadout and then used in the subsequent battle. Some elites are individual heroes like the Force Commander or an Eldar Farseer, others are elite squads like Terminators, or the most expensive ones are super units like the giant Eldar Walker. Once you have purchased an elite, you can redeploy it after it dies for free, after of course a short cooldown. This means that you can deploy cheaper elites early, quickly stacking your army with some powerful units. But if you don't use this advantage to finish your opponent quickly, they may pull out a super unit which will require a hell of a lot of your units to bring down. I really do like how the elites work, and aside from the individual unit balance, I think they add a really nice dynamic to the pre and during game strategy. This leads nicely into passives. Before a game begins, players select a loadout. This consists of 3 elites, each with their own passive, which activates when they are deployed, as well as 3 army passives which are always active. The passives range from buffing individual structures, giving certain units different moves, or by giving healing auras to outposts on resource nodes. I was told the build we were playing was pretty locked down, but there would be many more passives to unlock and utilise with the full release. Some of the most powerful passives only work when a specific elite is deployed. This further adds risk-reward to the usage of your elites. Each army also has a super spell, for the lack of a better word, which costs elite points to use, but gets more expensive each time you cast it. These are definitely aces in the hole, and something that you could use at the vanguard of a push onto an objective, or as a last resort protective measure. That pretty much sums up everything that jumped out at me initially as either unique to Dawn of War 3, or at least initially was comparable to other games in the franchise. I was pleasantly surprised by how each army felt very different to the other. Space Marines felt very traditional, durable and straightforward, so let's start by talking about them. Space Marines felt most familiar, an armory for upgrades, barracks for advanced units, and a machine cult for vehicles. Teching up through the tiers occurs at the main base as you'd expect, and generally units you can field fit into every niche required. Tactical Marine squads for your meat and veg, scouts with or without sniper rifles for vision and map control, heavy gun crews for locking down areas, and assault marines with jump packs for disrupting the enemy lines. The elites are simply that, elite. with single unit heroes like the Force Commander and Librarian, or elite squads of Terminators and TAC Marines, and finally a super unit with a pair of giant miniguns and missile strikes, which will draw the fire from the entire enemy army and dish it back in kind. In terms of vehicles, I found the Land Speeders to be a little bit lackluster, but the Dreadnoughts and Predator tanks fit purpose very well. The Whirlwinds are a nice addition to what I was used to with Space Marines, although they don't fire unless you use their ability, so it's important to keep them in the back of your mind when moving forward with your force. One unique aspect to the Space Marines is the drop pod mechanic. Once you are able to build a unit, you may build it and deploy it from a drop pod. This can be very effective, as you might expect, slamming a Dreadnought into the middle of the enemy infantry squads whilst disrupting their fire can cause a right ruckus. Drop pods can also be equipped with gun turrets, which slam into the ground and shoot at enemies in range until either they're destroyed or they've run out of ammo. For any new players to the franchise, or indeed RTS, I would definitely recommend Space Marines, and as I explain the Eldar and Orcs, you'll probably see why. The Eldar are a particularly elusive race. Their builder units, as I said earlier, can teleport short distances, but their buildings can also do the same, relocating entire bases to avoid incoming forces, or to provide a pop-up army in an unexpected location. They also have webway gates, as in previous Dawn of War games, these giving you portals to send units from point to point across potentially the entire map. Anyone familiar with Eldar will see some memorable units, but alas, no Guardians. Instead, we've got Dire Avengers, although they do look pretty similar and basically fit the same purpose, to be thrown into the meat grinder. Dark Reapers are back, and they have a setup time and do some tasty damage. There's the classic Howling Banshees for the melee wetwork, Rangers, which are surprisingly damaging and when used effectively are highly irritating to fight against, and finally what I thought were Warp Spiders are actually Shadow Spectres, a new anti-army unit which I've never come across. The elite infantry again come in a familiar form, Wraith Guard, but there is a new addition which are squads of 3 Wraith Blades, which are basically miniature Wraith Lords who love a hot bit of melee. Any Dawn of War veteran will be delighted to see Viper jet bikes, Falcon grav tanks and fire prisms on the vehicle choices. There is however no Wraith Lord, but this is instead an elite. With the inclusion of the Wraith Lord, we also have the Farseer, but no Seer Council, and in fact there are no squad elites for the Eldar. We also have an elite Banshee and an elite Ranger, and finally the super unit, a Wraith Knight, which is essentially a colossal Wraith Lord. The Wraith Knight is a great centerpiece unit for the Eldar, incredibly powerful, great disruption, and also very agile. His leaping ability grants him very good escape as well as initiation. The Eldar's AoE global ability is a form of Psychic Storm, which can be attached to a unit to give it greater range. I found this ability quite difficult to fight against, but in the 3 to 4 hours that we had with the game, I'll forgive myself for not fully understanding every ability inside and out. The Eldar are fairly micro heavy, and to fully maximise their potential, you'll need to use the webway gates and guerrilla tactics. Moving on to our final race, the Orcs, these again play differently to both Space Marines and Eldar. Unlike the Marines and Eldar, Orcs do not tech up via their HQ. Orcs instead tech up by building Warg banners, and these serve multiple purposes. As well as providing the incremental journey to tearing up, they also offer a large AoE bonus, which grants the Orcs a hasty speed boost, and I think an increased damage for a short time. Building Warg banners just outside the enemy's line of sight, and then working the boys into a frenzy before attacking can be a great way to give yourself an edge when initiating combat. The Warg Banner's final gift is Mana from Heaven, in the form of scrap metal which falls from space around the Warg Banners once they are placed and will continue to fall as long as the banner stands. These piles of metal can be used by almost all Orc units to upgrade themselves, extra armour for the boys, or a rechargeable shield for the war trucks. This functionality alone gives the Orc players a lot to deal with, but something that can be very effective if micromanaged correctly. I do feel like this makes the Orcs one of the hardest races to play, but potentially one of the most destructive. Orky infantry is pretty much what you'd expect, standard boys, shooter boys and finally some knobs. More specialised infantry includes tank busters and def gun looters, although I couldn't seem to find any storm boys, which makes me a little bit sad because they're a favoured unit of mine, but the Warg boosters provide enough speed to overrun most enemies in seconds, so perhaps they're not needed. Vehicles are quite varied, but basically you've got your standard war trucks, some artillery, and then the killer cans and def dreads. The elites, like the Eldar, don't seem to contain any squads. There's a war boss and a weird boy, which are directly comparable to the Force Commander and Librarian, a big mech and a mad dread, which are essentially special killer cans and def dreads, and finally the super unit, the Morkanaut, which is a giant fat orky walker, which I actually found to be quite slow and easily tied up. But perhaps the lack of experience with the Orcs probably had a lot to do with that, and I'd like to give it another few goes before I make a final verdict. Orcs of course do have an AoE ability that can be cast. It's quite similar to the Eldar Storm, and is basically a vortex of swirling scrap metal. I would love to get more hands on with the multiplayer. I feel like having to learn all 3 armies in as many hours made it rather difficult to fully evaluate how well the game plays in a slightly more competitive arena. I would say I struggled a little sometimes to spot and identify certain units, but this again could be down to a lack of experience and time with the units and armies. Generally I had a good time, and even though my heart aches for the sync kill animations we know and love, I do want to play more Dawn of War 3. Guys and girls, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has answered some questions that you've had about Dawn of War 3 and the multiplayer up until now. Please hit like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think. Until next time, good noon!